The air in my kitchen felt heavy that evening, like the weight of every unspoken word between us had settled into the cracks of the old oak table. My son, Daniel, sat across from me, his hands fidgeting, eyes darting to the floor. "Mama," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, "I need to borrow some money. A lot of money." His words hit me like a slap, sharp and stinging, because I knew what he didn't that. I had $2 million tucked away in a trust, hidden even from him. Thank God I hadn't told him. Not yet. My heart churned with a storm of feelings, because he hadn't called in months. Sadness, because the boy who once drew me crayon hearts now looked at me like a stranger. And love, always love, because he was still my Danny, no matter how far he'd drifted. I wanted to scream, to shake him and ask why he only came when he needed something. But I didn't. I just sat there, gripping my coffee mug, the warmth grounding me as my mind spun. What had brought us here? How had my son, my pride, become this man who couldn't meet my eyes? I didn't know then that this moment would unravel secrets I wasn't ready to face. Secrets that would break me and rebuild me. So, come, sit with me a while. Grab a cup of tea. Let it warm your hands. And listen to my story. If it touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe. It might just mean the world to someone else out there. 2. I was 22 when I first laid eyes on George Wembley, standing tall in his Sunday best outside the Willow Creek Baptist Church in our little town of Fairhope, Alabama. His smile was crooked, but his eyes were kind, and when he tipped his hat and said, "Miss Edith, you're prettier than a spring sunrise," I felt my cheeks burn. That was 1968, and Fairhope was all blooming dogwoods and slow, lazy afternoons. I was a dreamer then, sketching dresses in a notebook, hoping one day to open a little boutique on Main Street. George had other plans. He wanted a family, a home filled with laughter, and I couldn't say no to that dream either. We married under the magnolia tree in my mama's backyard, with fireflies dancing around us. By 25, I was pregnant with Daniel, and George was working double shifts at the lumber mill to save for our first house, a modest 2-bedroom, with a porch that creaked under our rocking chairs. I'd sit there, rubbing my belly, imagining Daniel growing up to be a doctor or a teacher, someone who'd make us proud. Those were good years, simple years. George would come home smelling of sawdust, scoop me up, and spin me around the kitchen while the radio played Patsy Cline. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Daniel was born on a rainy April morning, his cries loud enough to wake the neighbors. I held him, my heart so full it hurt, and whispered, "You're my whole world, little man." George built a crib with his own hands, sanding it smooth so Daniel wouldn't get a splinter. We'd take turns rocking him, singing lullabies until our voices cracked. I gave up my dress sketches to stay home, stitching curtains instead, baking pies for church suppers, and teaching Daniel his ABCs. Every sacrifice felt worth it when he'd wrap his tiny arms around my neck and say, "Love you, Mama." But time has a way of slipping through your fingers. Daniel grew fast, too fast. By high school, he was tall like his daddy, with a grin that could charm the stars. He played baseball, dated Jenny Harper from down the street, and promised me he'd go to college. I believed him. George and I scraped together every penny, depositing checks at Fairhope Community Bank, dreaming of the day we'd see him walk across a stage in a cap and gown. But then George got sick. Lung cancer, the doctor said, from years breathing sawdust at the mill. He fought hard, but by Daniel's senior year, George was gone. I buried him under that same magnolia tree, and a piece of me went with him. I was 42, a widow, and Daniel was all I had left. I took a job at the bank, balancing ledgers, smiling at customers, and hiding my grief. Daniel got into Auburn University, and I sold George's old truck to pay his first semester's tuition. He'd call every Sunday, telling me about his classes, his friends, and I'd listen, my heart swelling with pride. But then the calls slowed. Once a month, then every few months. He met Cassandra in his junior year, a sharp-tongued girl from Birmingham who wore designer heels and never smiled at me. "She's just shy, Mama," Daniel said. But I saw the way her eyes flicked over my faded dresses, like I was beneath her. They married right after graduation, and I wasn't invited. It was small. "Mama," Daniel said over the phone. His voice rushed. "We didn't want a fuss." I swallowed my hurt, sent them a quilt I'd sewn, and told myself he'd come around. Their daughter Lily was born a year later, and oh, how I loved that little girl. She had George's crooked smile and Daniel's curious eyes. I'd drive 2 hours to Birmingham to see her, bringing homemade cookies and stuffed animals. Cassandra would let me in, but her welcome was cold, like I was an inconvenience. Daniel was always busy with work, managing some tech startup I didn't understand. I'd play with Lily, braid her hair, and tell her stories about her granddaddy. But those visits got shorter and shorter. By the time I retired from the bank at 65, I'd saved enough to live quietly. More than enough, actually. George's life insurance, plus years of careful saving, had grown into $2 million, tucked away in a trust at Fairhope Community Bank. I never told Daniel, not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted him to build his own life, not lean on mine. I lived simply in my little house, tending my rose garden, volunteering at the church, and waiting for the day Daniel might call just to talk, not to ask for something. But that day in my kitchen, when he showed up unannounced, I knew something was wrong. He looked older, his hair thinning, his shoulders slumped. "Mama, I need help," he said, and my heart sank. He told me about debts tens of thousands, from a failed business venture. Cassandra had left him, taking Lily, and he was living in a rented apartment, barely scraping by. "I just need a loan, Mama, I'll pay you back." His voice cracked, and for a moment I saw my little boy again, the one who'd cling to me during thunderstorms. I wanted to tell him about the trust, to wipe away his worries with a single check, but something stopped me. A quiet voice in my gut, whispering that this wasn't the whole story. I looked at him, searching for the truth, ineligibly lived long enough to know that getting old in America isn't what the movies make it out to be. You spend your life building homes, families, dreams, and then one day, you're sitting alone in a quiet house, wondering where everyone went. They don't tell you how loneliness creeps in, slow and heavy, like fog rolling over the bayou. The AARP says nearly 1 in 3 folks over 65 live alone, and I believe it. I see it at church suppers, in the tired eyes of women like me, who smile but carry an ache no one names. We're not just forgotten by the world. Sometimes, we're forgotten by our own. I used to think love was enough to keep a family, enough of it into your children, and they'll carry it forward. But love doesn't always work that way. You can give everything, your time, your savings, your heart, and still end up a stranger in their lives. I learned that the hard way with Daniel, yet there's a quiet strength in knowing you did your best, even when it hurts. I think of the women I meet at the Fairhope Senior Center, knitting blankets for grandkids who rarely visit, or volunteering at the library, reading to kids who aren't their own. We keep going, not because it's easy, but because dignity isn't something you lose with age. It's something you hold on to, like a candle in the dark, no matter how small the flame. I told Daniel I'd think about the loan. His face fell, but he nodded, mumbling a thank you before leaving. The house felt emptier than ever after he was gone, the silence ringing in my ears. I sat by the window, watching the dusk settle over my rose garden, and tried to make sense of the ache in my chest. I wanted to help him. God knows I did, but that whisper in my gut wouldn't let go. Something wasn't right. A week later, I got a call from Marjorie, my old friend from the bank. She'd heard through the grapevine that Daniel had been asking around town for money, not just from me. "Edith, I don't want to pry," she said, her voice soft, "but I saw him at the bank, talking to Mr. Thompson about a loan. He seemed desperate." My stomach twisted. Desperate. He hadn't said a word about that. I thanked Marjorie, hung up, and drove to Birmingham the next day. I needed to see him, to understand. When I arrived at his apartment, a cramped place with peeling paint, he was surprised but let me in. The room smelled of stale coffee, and papers were strewn across a table: bills, bank statements, legal documents. I asked him to tell me the truth, all of it. He hesitated, then sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. "Mama, it's worse than I said," he whispered. "I owe over 100,000, not just the business, gambling. I thought I could win it back, but I kept losing. Gambling." The word hit me like a punch. My boy, my Daniel, caught in something so dark. I remembered George's warnings about the slot machines at the county fair, how they could pull a man under. I'd never imagined Daniel would fall into that trap. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice shaking. He looked away. Was ashamed. And Cassandra, she found out. That's why she left. She took Lily to her parents' place in Montgomery. I felt my heart crack open, the pieces spilling out. Geiger, grief, betrayal. All those years I'd poured everything into him, and he'd hidden this. I wanted to yell, to walk away. But I saw the boy I'd raised in his broken posture, and I couldn't. Instead, I asked, "How much do you really need, Daniel?" He named a figure, $150,000. I thought of the trust, the 2 million sitting untouched. It would be so easy to fix this. But then he said something that stopped me cold. "Cassandra's been calling," he said. "She says, if I don't pay off the debts, she'll make sure I never see Lily again." His voice broke, but my blood ran cold. Cassandra, with her cold eyes and sharp words, using my granddaughter as leverage. I'd always known she was calculating, but this was cruel. I sat there, stunned, as the truth sank in. My son wasn't just drowning in debt, he was being manipulated, torn apart by a woman who'd never loved him the way I'd hoped. I drove home that night, the highway blurring through tears I hadn't let fall in years. I thought of George, how he'd have known what to say, how to fix this, but he was gone, and I was alone with a choice: give Daniel the money and risk enabling him, or hold back and risk losing him and Lily forever. I pulled into my driveway, the magnolia tree looming in the moonlight, and whispered a prayer for strength. I wasn't ready to give up on my boy, but I wasn't going to let him or Cassandra break me. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. I didn't give Daniel the money, not yet. Instead, I called a lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, who'd helped me set up the trust years ago. I told him everything: Daniel's debts, the gambling, Cassandra's threats. He listened quietly, then said, "Edith, you can't fix this with money alone. You need to protect yourself and Lily." He suggested I use part of the trust to hire a private investigator to look into Cassandra's actions, and to set up a separate fund for Lily's future, one her parents couldn't touch. It was the first time I felt a spark of control, a way to love my family without losing myself. I met Daniel again, this time at a diner in Fairhope, neutral ground. I told him I'd help, but not with a blank check. I'd pay for a counselor to help him with the gambling, and I'd cover some of his debts, but only if he agreed to a repayment plan and got help. He looked at me, eyes wet, and nodded. "I'm sorry, Mama," he said, and for the first time in years, I believed he meant it. It wasn't a fix, but it was a start. As for Lily, I drove to Montgomery to see her. Cassandra wasn't happy, but I didn't care. I sat with my granddaughter in her backyard, under a big oak tree, and we painted watercolors, bright blues and yellows, like the ones she used to make with me. She told me she missed her daddy, and I promised her she'd see him soon. I didn't tell her about the trust I'd set up for her college, or the investigator keeping an eye on her mama. Some things are better left unsaid until the time is right. Back in Fairhope, I found a new rhythm. I joined a yoga class at the senior center, where I met Ruth, a widow with a laugh that could light up a room. We'd sit on my porch after class, sipping sweet tea and swapping stories about our kids, our losses, our hopes. I started a small vegetable garden: tomatoes, zucchini, and herbs, something to nurture that didn't ask for more than I could give. Every Sunday, I'd take Lily to church when she visited, her little hand in mine, and I'd feel George's presence in the hymns, steadying me. I learned something through all this. Love doesn't mean losing yourself. True love holds space for dignity and mutual respect. I'd spent years giving everything to Daniel, thinking that was what a mother did. But I'd forgotten to give myself the same grace. Now, I was learning to balance love with boundaries, to hold tight to my own worth while still holding space for my son to find his way back. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Someone out there might need to hear it today, to know they're not alone in their struggles, that there's hope on the other side of pain. Thank you for listening. May your day be peaceful and full of grace.